A handful of something was dumped into my mailbox at 3 in the morning, a viscous mixture that smelled of acid and garbage, and then disappeared quietly among the freshly uprooted flower hedges. Small, jagged boot prints, embedded in the mud, whispered, "I'm still watching." For the first time in my life, the wind blowing through the yard was painfully cold. Every time I opened the door, it felt like I was walking into a crosshairs. But if she thought a little dirt and a little meanness would be enough to make me submit, well, Karen Morrison had just made the biggest mistake of her life. I had just opened a small law practice in Pinewood Heights, a quiet suburban neighborhood. Fresh out of Harvard Law School and eager to prove myself, I was taking on modest cases. My name was Jake Mitchell, 29, a young lawyer still learning the ropes but burning with ambition. And in this picture-perfect neighborhood, the biggest obstacle was 38-year-old Karen Morrison, the HOA president. She was notorious for enforcing the rules as if they were federal law, smothering any challenge with a cold stare and a legalistic streak. When David quietly approached me about filing for divorce, I had no idea that representing him would make Karen view me as her sworn enemy. Little did I know that standing up for a good man would unleash a campaign of terror that would test everything I thought I knew about justice and community. But why would a young lawyer dare to go head-to-head with the self-appointed queen of our neighborhood? The moment I agreed to represent David in his divorce case, Karen declared war on me with the intensity of a general planning a military campaign. She genuinely believed I had manipulated David into leaving her, completely blind to the fact that David had endured her controlling behavior for 10 miserable years. In Karen's twisted worldview, I was the villain who destroyed her perfect marriage, not the lawyer helping a man escape an emotionally abusive relationship. The first strike came during my second week representing David, and it was clearly designed to establish her dominance. I found a bright yellow citation tucked under my windshield wiper, informing me that I owed $500 for letting my grass grow higher than 2.5 inches, according to HOA regulations. The fine was written in Karen's distinctive handwriting, with angry underlines and exclamation points that revealed her emotional state. I immediately grabbed my measuring tape and checked every inch of my front lawn. My grass was exactly 2.3 inches tall, well within the stated limit. When I marched over to Karen's house to dispute this obvious harassment, she stood in her doorway with arms crossed and a smug smile that made my blood boil. Her perfectly manicured lawn stretched behind her like a green carpet, clearly maintained by professional landscapers. "Ooh, it's the baby lawyer," she said with dripping condensation, her voice carrying the tone of someone addressing a particularly slow child. "Regulations are regulations, sweetie. Maybe you should have thought about that before you decided to break up happy families for money. People like you are what's wrong with this world, always stirring up trouble where none existed before." I held up my measuring tape and showed her the exact measurements, speaking in the calm, professional tone I had learned in law school. "Mrs. Morrison, I've measured my grass 3 times, and it's well within your stated regulations. This citation appears to be issued in error, and I'm requesting that you withdraw it immediately." Karen's smile grew wider and more menacing. "I don't make errors, young man. My measurements are always accurate, and my authority in this community is absolute. You can either pay the fine like everyone else, or you can learn what happens to people who try to challenge me." She slammed the door in my face with enough force to rattle the decorative glass panels. That was just the appetizer in what would become a 6-month feast of harassment. During week 2, Karen escalated to full surveillance mode, transforming my quiet residential street into something resembling a police state. She hired Sentinel Security Services to monitor my house 24 hours a day, claiming I was engaging in suspicious activities that threatened community safety. The security guards were instructed to document every detail of my daily routine. Every time I stepped outside to check my mail or water my plants, someone with a camera would appear from behind parked cars or neighboring bushes to document my every move. The security guards would take photos of my car's position in my own driveway, measure the distance between my trash cans and the curb with official-looking measuring devices, and even time how long I spent talking to neighbors with stopwatches. They carried clipboards and wrote detailed reports about mundane activities, like "Subject retrieves newspaper from driveway at 7:43 a.m." and "Subject watered front garden for approximately 12 minutes." I started feeling like a prisoner in my own home, constantly being watched and judged for the most mundane activities. The psychological pressure was intense. I found myself hesitating before opening my front door. wondering what normal activity might be twisted into evidence of wrongdoing. Even taking out the trash became an exercise in anxiety, knowing that every movement was being recorded and analyzed. Week 3 brought psychological warfare that targeted my reputation and livelihood. Karen launched a comprehensive character assassination campaign, spreading rumors throughout the neighborhood that I was a dirty lawyer who specialized in destroying happy families for profit. She told anyone who would listen that I used unethical tactics to convince innocent spouses to file for divorce, painting me as a predator who fed on marital discord like some kind of legal vampire. The Whisper campaign was devastatingly effective because Karen had spent 5 years building relationships and establishing herself as a trusted authority figure. Neighbors who used to wave cheerfully when I came home now crossed the street to avoid me, their faces filled with suspicion and distrust. Mrs. Patterson, who had always brought me cookies during the holidays and asked about my law practice with genuine interest, suddenly stopped making eye contact and hurried inside whenever she saw me coming. Even the mailman started treating me with cold suspicion, delivering my mail with obvious reluctance and avoiding conversation. The pharmacist at the local drugstore began watching me carefully whenever I picked up prescriptions, as if I might steal something when he wasn't looking. Karen had successfully poisoned the well of community trust that I had worked so hard to build since moving to Pinewood Heights. But Karen wasn't satisfied with just ruining my reputation. She wanted to cause real, tangible damage that would force me to leave the neighborhood entirely. Week 4 marked the beginning of physical attacks on my property that escalated in both frequency and severity. I woke up one Tuesday morning to find my white picket fence covered in red spray paint with the words, "Get out," painted in jagged, angry letters across the front. The paint was still wet, indicating that the attack had happened just hours before dawn. Every flower in my carefully maintained garden had been uprooted and scattered across my driveway like a botanical crime scene, creating a devastating mess of soil, broken stems, and trampled petals. My trash cans were overturned and their contents spread across my front lawn in deliberate patterns that suggested careful planning rather than random vandalism. Coffee grounds, banana peels, and shredded paper created a disgusting collage that took hours to clean up. Each night, I would spend time repairing the damage and cleaning up the destruction, replanting flowers and scrubbing paint off surfaces with determination that matched my growing anger. But every morning brought fresh vandalism waiting for me, as if my anonymous tormentor was watching my repair efforts and planning new ways to break my spirit. The attacks became more creative and personal. Someone filled my mailbox with dog waste, poured motor oil across my driveway in patterns that spelled out profane words, and even managed to superglue my car doors shut while I slept. I installed security cameras around my property, investing in a professional-grade system that cost more than I could really afford. But whoever was responsible for the attacks was surprisingly clever about avoiding detection, demonstrating knowledge of surveillance techniques that seemed almost professional. They seemed to know exactly where my cameras were positioned and only struck in the blind spots I couldn't cover, moving with the stealth of someone who had carefully studied my security setup. When I filed police reports, the officers were sympathetic, but explained that without clear video evidence or witnesses, there wasn't much they could do beyond increasing patrol frequency in my area. Officer Chen, who had been patrolling our neighborhood for 3 years, seemed particularly frustrated by the situation. "I've never seen anything like this systematic harassment," he told me during one of his visits. "Whoever's doing this has experience and resources." However, during one of my cleanup sessions, I noticed something interesting in the mud near my destroyed flower bed. Fresh sneaker prints, women's size 7, with a distinctive zigzag tread pattern that I mentally filed away for future reference. The prints were deep and clear, suggesting someone who had spent considerable time working in my garden during the previous night's rain. I took photos of the prints from multiple angles, something my legal training had taught me to do automatically. The final escalation came during week 6 at the monthly HOA meeting held in our community center, and it was clear that Karen had been planning this moment like a military strategist preparing for a decisive battle. She had clearly been building toward this public confrontation because she came armed with a 5-page indictment that she had typed up with legal-looking formatting and official language designed to intimidate. The community center was packed with more residents than I had ever seen at a neighborhood meeting. Word had spread about the ongoing conflict, and people came expecting drama. Karen stood at the front podium wearing her most expensive business suit, radiating the kind of confidence that comes from never having faced real consequences for bad behavior. She held her prepared statement like a prosecutor presenting evidence to a jury. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began with theatrical authority, "we are gathered here tonight to address a serious threat to our community's peace and stability. Jake Mitchell has demonstrated a pattern of behavior that undermines everything we've worked to build in Pinewood Heights." Her voice grew stronger and more dramatic as she warmed to her performance, clearly enjoying her moment in the spotlight. She accused me of polluting the community atmosphere with his toxic presence, demonstrating uncooperative behavior toward legitimate HOA authority, and serving as the primary cause of division and discord in our once peaceful neighborhood. Her voice grew more theatrical with each accusation, and she gestured dramatically as if she were performing Shakespeare for a television audience. The prepared statement included quotes from unnamed neighbors expressing concern about my disruptive influence and my suspicious legal activities. The climax came when Karen demanded that all residents vote to expel me from the neighborhood entirely, claiming that my continued presence posed a threat to property values and community harmony. When I stood up to defend myself, following proper meeting procedures and speaking in a calm, respectful tone, she pointed her finger at me and shouted loud enough for everyone to hear, "Sit down! You're nothing but a nobody intern lawyer that no one's ever heard of." The room fell silent as her words echoed off the walls, and I could see neighbors shifting uncomfortably in their seats. Then she delivered her final threat with the confidence of someone who believed money could buy any outcome. "I'm going to sue you for defamation and malicious interference with marriage. I have enough money to hire the best attorney in the entire city, and I'm going to destroy your pathetic little career before it even gets started. You picked the wrong person to mess with, boy." That's when I smiled and stood up slowly, letting the silence stretch until every person in that room was hanging on my next words. The quiet confidence in my demeanor seemed to surprise people who expected me to be intimidated by Karen's threats. "Mrs. Morrison," I said calmly, my voice carrying clearly through the silent room, "I'm afraid you've made a serious mistake about who needs a lawyer more in this situation." Nobody in that room knew that I had a USB drive in my jacket pocket containing 47 high-definition videos of Karen vandalizing my property, recorded by 6 hidden cameras I had strategically installed after the third attack. While Karen was busy terrorizing me with her escalating campaign of harassment, I wasn't just sitting around feeling sorry for myself or planning my retreat from the neighborhood. I was doing what lawyers do best, methodically building an airtight case using every piece of legal knowledge I possessed and every resource at my disposal. My background gave me advantages that Karen couldn't possibly anticipate, and I used every single one of them to investigate Pinewood Heights HOA from the inside out. My first major discovery came through careful examination of the HOA's financial records, which every resident has a legal right to review under California state law. Karen had been sloppy about covering her tracks, probably because she never expected anyone to challenge her authority with serious legal scrutiny. Buried in the quarterly reports, hidden among legitimate expenses for landscaping and maintenance, I found that Karen had authorized $15,000 from the community fund to pay for Sentinel Security Services, the same company that was stalking me 24 hours a day. This was a clear violation of HOA bylaws, which strictly prohibit using community funds for personal vendettas or individual harassment campaigns. Even more damning, she had approved this expenditure through a forged signature scheme without calling for a vote or even informing the other board members. The paper trail showed that she had created fake meeting minutes and backdated authorization documents to make the payments appear legitimate. The second breakthrough came when I analyzed the HOA regulations themselves, comparing current versions with archived copies from previous years. Karen had unilaterally modified 12 different community rules over the past 6 months without following proper procedures, essentially rewriting the law to suit her personal preferences and vendettas. California state law requires HOA regulation changes to be voted on by residents after proper notice and discussion periods. But Karen had simply decided to implement her own version of the rules and enforce them as if they were legally binding. These illegal modifications included ridiculous restrictions like grass height cannot exceed 2 inches, changed from the original 2.5 inches. Only earth-toned paint colors are permitted, previously any neutral color was acceptable, and residents cannot have visitors park on the street for more than 30 minutes, originally 2 hours. Each change seemed designed to create more opportunities for fines and harassment, but the biggest bombshell was still waiting to be discovered in the deeper financial records. Through methodical review of documents going back 2 years, working late into the night with spreadsheets and calculators, I found evidence that Karen had been running a systematic extortion scheme that would have impressed organized crime bosses. She had issued arbitrary fines to 8 different residents, collecting a total of $23,000 in penalties for violations that either didn't exist or were completely subjective. Instead of depositing these funds into the community account where they belonged, she had been transferring the money directly into her personal checking account through a complex series of transactions designed to hide the theft. The scheme was sophisticated enough to avoid casual detection, but sloppy enough that a trained investigator could unravel it with patience and determination. My most valuable ally turned out to be the person closest to Karen, her own husband, David. During one of our confidential meetings about his divorce case, he revealed that he had been secretly documenting his wife's behavior for months, hoping to use the evidence in their proceedings. His software engineering background had given him the technical skills to recover deleted emails and access password-protected files on their shared home computer. "Jake," he said quietly, his hands trembling as he handed me a thick folder of printed emails. "I've been living with this monster for 10 years, watching her destroy people's lives for entertainment. I couldn't stand by and watch her do it to you too." The emails revealed Karen's plans to make life so miserable for certain residents that they'll have no choice but to move away, along with detailed strategies for harassment and financial manipulation. David also provided me with access to financial records that Karen thought she had hidden, revealing the full scope of her corruption and abuse of power. He had screenshots of her online banking transactions, copies of forged documents, and even audio recordings of phone conversations where Karen bragged about her scheme to friends from other neighborhoods. Mrs. Elena Rodriguez, a 65-year-old retired accountant who lived 3 houses down from me, became my second crucial ally after she learned about my investigation through neighborhood whispers. She had been one of Karen's early victims, fined $2,000 for planting unauthorized flower colors in her front garden, bright yellow marigolds that Karen claimed violated the earth tone only rule she had invented without community approval. Elena's background in financial analysis proved invaluable as she helped me trace the money trail and understand exactly how Karen's embezzlement scheme worked. "I've seen this kind of fraud before in corporate settings," she explained during one of our evening meetings in her kitchen. "Karen is using classic techniques, small amounts spread over time, fake documentation, and relying on people's reluctance to question authority figures." Together, we built a comprehensive picture of financial fraud that included detailed charts, timeline analyses, and cross-reference documentation that would have impressed a federal prosecutor. Elena's attention to detail helped identify patterns and connections that I might have missed working alone. Officer James Chen, who patrolled our neighborhood as part of his regular beat, had been watching Karen's behavior with growing concern for months before I ever approached him. When I presented him with video evidence of the property destruction, he immediately recognized the serious nature of the crimes being committed. "This isn't just vandalism," he told me after reviewing the footage. "This is systematic harassment with clear premeditation and escalating violence." He quietly opened an official investigation into criminal vandalism and harassment, assigning a case number and beginning the formal documentation process that would be necessary for prosecution. He also connected me with Detective Maria Santos, who specialized in local government corruption cases and had experience with HOA fraud schemes in other communities. But the real game changer came during a phone conversation with David about strategy for his divorce case, when I casually mentioned some precedents we could use. "When I was an intern at the California Attorney General's office," I said without thinking, "I worked specifically in the local government corruption unit, investigating cases just like this." David went quiet for a long moment before asking, "Wait, you mean you actually know how to handle this kind of criminal conspiracy?" "Exactly," I replied, realizing that I had been downplaying my relevant experience. "I know precisely what Karen has been doing wrong from a legal standpoint, and more importantly, I know exactly how to make sure she faces real consequences for her actions. I've seen cases like this before, and I know which agencies to contact and which laws apply." My internship had involved working on cases involving municipal corruption, HOA fraud, and abuse of community authority. I had learned investigation techniques, evidence-gathering procedures, and prosecution strategies that applied directly to Karen's crimes. More importantly, I still had contacts in the Attorney General's office who could provide guidance and support for a case of this magnitude. My counterattack strategy involved 3 separate legal approaches that would hit Karen from multiple angles simultaneously, making it impossible for her to focus her defense effectively. First, I prepared comprehensive civil charges for property destruction, harassment, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and violations of my civil rights under fair housing laws. Second, I compiled criminal charges that would be filed with the district attorney's office, including embezzlement, abuse of authority, misuse of community funds, conspiracy to commit fraud, and systematic harassment. The criminal case would be handled by prosecutors with far more resources than Karen could match, regardless of how expensive her lawyers might be. Third, I drafted a formal petition to remove her from the HOA presidency and recover all the money she had stolen from residents. This petition included a complete financial audit, demands for restitution, and proposals for new oversight procedures that would prevent future corruption. But my secret weapon was the evidence I had gathered, showing that Karen's vandalism wasn't limited to my property. Over the past 2 years, she had been systematically destroying the property of anyone who dared to question her authority. I had video footage, witness statements, and physical evidence proving that 5 other families had been targeted for the same treatment I was receiving. Mrs. Chen from Maple Street had suffered mysterious damage to her rose bushes after questioning a fine for excessive holiday decorations. The Johnsons on Oak Avenue found their car tires slashed after requesting financial transparency from the HOA board. The elderly Garcias discovered their mailbox destroyed with a baseball bat after David Garcia asked pointed questions at a community meeting. On Friday afternoon of that week, I had a legal courier deliver a formal letter to Karen's house, written on official letterhead and following proper legal notification procedures. The message was simple and direct. Mrs. Morrison, I invite you to visit my office this coming Monday morning at 10 a.m. We need to discuss some serious legal matters that require your immediate attention. You're welcome to bring your attorney if you feel it would be helpful. The courier was instructed to obtain a signature confirmation and photograph Karen receiving the document, ensuring that she couldn't later claim ignorance of the meeting request. I spent the weekend preparing my presentation materials and coordinating with law enforcement contacts who would be standing by for the next phase of my plan. Monday morning arrived, and Karen showed up at my office with exactly the kind of high-powered legal representation I expected. Richard Blackwood was a well-known attorney from Los Angeles who specialized in defending wealthy clients from fraud and corruption charges. His $1,000 suit and gold watch made it clear that Karen was serious about this confrontation, and his reputation for aggressive tactics preceded him into my modest office. Karen strutted in wearing her most expensive outfit, radiating the kind of confidence that comes from never having faced real consequences for bad behavior. "Jake," she announced with theatrical authority, "I've retained Mr. Blackwood here to handle my lawsuit against you. I hope you're prepared to pay for what you've done to my family and my reputation in this community." I gestured for them to sit down in the chairs across from my desk, maintaining the calm demeanor that had served me well in courtrooms. "Karen," I said evenly, "I think we should watch a few videos together before we discuss any lawsuits." I turned on the large monitor mounted on my wall and started with the clearest footage I had. There was Karen, captured in perfect high-definition clarity, spray painting my fence at 2 in the morning. The infrared lighting made her face as visible as if it were broad daylight, and there was absolutely no question about her identity. She was even wearing the same distinctive jacket she had worn to our HOA meeting the week before. Richard Blackwood's face went pale as he watched his client commit obvious criminal vandalism. "Karen," he said quietly, "perhaps you can explain what we're seeing here." "Oh, we're just getting started," I interrupted, switching to the next video. This one showed Karen systematically destroying my flower garden, pulling up plants and throwing them across my driveway with obvious satisfaction. The third video captured her attempting to break the lock on my front door. The fourth showed her dumping garbage across my lawn while looking around nervously to make sure no one was watching. By the time I had shown 6 different videos of Karen's criminal behavior, she had gone completely silent. Her confident demeanor had evaporated, replaced by the pale, sweaty panic of someone who realizes they've been caught red-handed. But I wasn't finished yet. I placed a thick folder on my desk and opened it to reveal the comprehensive case I had built against her. "Here's what we have so far," I said, spreading out the evidence like a prosecutor presenting to a jury. 47 high-definition videos documenting criminal property destruction. Financial records proving embezzlement of $38,000 from community funds. 23 sworn statements from residents describing harassment, intimidation, and illegal fines, internal emails outlining your systematic plan to force out residents who didn't submit to your authority. Richard Blackwood was frantically taking notes, clearly realizing that his client had walked into a legal disaster. Karen just stared at the evidence in stunned silence, probably calculating how much money she would need to make this problem disappear. And finally, I said, pulling out one last document, we have this report from the Internal Revenue Service confirming that you failed to report income from illegal fines as taxable earnings. That's federal tax evasion, Karen, which carries much more serious penalties than anything we've discussed so far. Within hours, word of Karen's legal troubles had spread throughout Pinewood Heights like wildfire. By evening, 73 out of 85 households in our community had signed a petition demanding Karen's immediate removal from the HOA presidency. The anger and betrayal in people's voices was palpable. Residents felt violated by someone they had trusted to protect their interests. An emergency HOA meeting was called for that same evening, held in our community center with the largest turnout in the neighborhood's history. This time, Karen sat in the back row like any other resident, stripped of her authority, and facing the judgment of people she had bullied and manipulated for years. I stood at the front of the room and methodically presented every piece of evidence, playing the videos on a large screen so everyone could see Karen's crimes with their own eyes. Each new revelation brought gasps of shock and murmurs of outrage from the audience. People who had suffered under Karen's arbitrary rules suddenly understood that they weren't alone, and that her behavior had been criminal all along. Mrs. Rodriguez stood up and addressed the room with quiet dignity. I paid Karen $2,000 in fines last year, money I couldn't really afford on my fixed income. Now I understand that I was the victim of extortion, not legitimate community enforcement. Mr. Peterson, a 70-year-old veteran who lived on Elm Street, spoke next. That woman made me afraid to work in my own garden because I never knew what new rule she might invent to punish me. I want to thank Jake for having the courage to stand up when the rest of us were too intimidated to fight back. The vote to remove Karen from office was unanimous. Not a single person in that room supported her continued leadership, but just as we were about to formalize her removal, Karen suddenly stood up with a wild look in her eyes that made everyone in the room go silent. "You people think this is just about me getting revenge on one annoying lawyer," she shouted, her voice cracking with desperation and rage. "You have no idea what you've just destroyed. Jake Mitchell was only the first target in a much bigger plan that would have made all of us rich." The room went dead quiet as people tried to process what she had just said. "I've been working with Pinnacle Development Corporation to systematically acquire this entire neighborhood," she continued, apparently beyond caring about the consequences of her words. "The plan was to drive down property values by making life miserable for homeowners, forcing people to sell cheap so Pinnacle could buy the whole area for redevelopment. Jake was dangerous because lawyers asked too many questions, so he had to be eliminated first. But eventually, every single family in this room would have been pressured to sell their homes for a fraction of what they're worth." You could have heard a pin drop in that community center. Karen had just confessed to a conspiracy that would have destroyed the lives and financial security of everyone in Pinewood Heights. "We've already done this successfully in 2 other neighborhoods," she said with bitter satisfaction. "Riverside Gardens and Oakmont Hills, both sold out completely within 18 months. Pinnacle made millions, and I received substantial compensation for my coordination services." That's when I smiled and delivered the final blow. "Karen, thank you for that detailed confession. I should probably mention that this entire conversation is being recorded, and we have a special witness here tonight." Officer Chen stepped out from behind the crowd, his hand already reaching for his handcuffs. "Karen Morrison, you're under arrest for embezzlement, conspiracy to commit fraud, property destruction, and criminal enterprise. You have the right to remain silent, and I strongly suggest you use it." Karen's criminal trial became front-page news throughout the county, exposing the corruption scheme that had been targeting suburban communities for years. She was ultimately sentenced to 3 years in prison and ordered to pay $95,000 in restitution to her victims. The judge also imposed a 10-year ban on her holding any management position in homeowner associations or community organizations. David Morrison finally gained his freedom from a decade of emotional abuse and manipulation. During our final meeting to finalize his divorce, he shook my hand with tears in his eyes and said, "Jake, You didn't just save my marriage situation, you saved my entire life. I was starting to believe that Karen's version of reality was normal. The investigation into Pinnacle Development Corporation revealed connections to similar fraud schemes in 6 different counties, ultimately leading to federal charges against company executives and the recovery of millions of dollars for affected communities. Karen's desperate confession had accidentally exposed a criminal enterprise that had been operating for nearly 5 years. Pinewood Heights underwent a complete transformation in the months following Karen's arrest. The community voted to replace the single president system with a 5-member board that made decisions collectively and transparently. They established new bylaws requiring financial audits, regular community meetings, and strict oversight of any rule changes or fee assessments. Mrs. Rodriguez was elected as the first chairwoman of our new community board, bringing her accounting background and gentle leadership style to a position that had been corrupted by Karen's authoritarian approach. We're going to make sure that no single person ever again has enough power to terrorize this community, she promised during her acceptance speech. The community fund was professionally audited, and every penny of Karen's embezzled money was recovered and returned to residents. Each household received an average of $800 in refunds, money that had been illegally taken through fake fines and unauthorized fees. Many families used their refunds to improve their properties, creating a visible boost to neighborhood pride and property values. My own life changed dramatically as well. The reputation I gained from standing up to Karen brought new clients and opportunities I never could have imagined. Residents throughout the county began seeking my help with HOA disputes, municipal corruption cases, and other situations where ordinary people needed legal protection from those who abused their authority. My practice expanded from a 1-room office to a 3-room attorney firm specializing in community law and government accountability. The Pinewood Heights community asked me to serve as their permanent legal advisor, a role that allows me to help prevent future corruption while staying connected to the neighborhood that became my home. I regularly speak at community meetings and help other HOAs establish transparent governance practices based on what we learned from our experience with Karen. 1 year after Karen's arrest, I was standing in my front garden, the same flower bed she had destroyed so many times during her campaign of terror. The space that had once been a symbol of her cruelty was now blooming with tall, bright sunflowers that seemed to reach toward the sky with unshakable optimism. David stopped by with his 8-year-old son Tommy, who was fascinated by the garden's transformation. "Mr. Jake," Tommy asked with the innocent curiosity that only children possess, "why did you plant sunflowers instead of regular flowers?" I knelt down to his level and pointed at the magnificent yellow blooms swaying gently in the afternoon breeze. "Because sunflowers always turn toward the light, buddy. No matter how much darkness tries to cover them up, they always find a way to face what's right and good." David nodded with understanding, knowing the deeper meaning behind my choice, just like you did with Karen. "Not just me," I corrected, looking around at the neighborhood that had found its voice and its strength. "All of us, together. Sometimes it takes a whole community to make sure that light wins over darkness." As the sun set behind the houses of Pinewood Heights, casting golden light across the sunflower petals, I reflected on how much had changed since that first threatening citation appeared on my windshield. Sometimes a young lawyer with a worn briefcase and a second-hand suit can indeed change an entire community, especially when that community decides to stand together for what's right. And Karen Morrison, last I heard, she was learning to make sandwiches in the prison kitchen, serving meals to fellow inmates who had also thought they were above the law. Justice may sometimes arrive late, but it always finds its destination eventually. The sunflowers in my garden continued to grow taller each day, their faces permanently turned toward the light, just as our community had learned to turn toward truth, transparency, and genuine justice for all.